Welcome back to the Untold Stories exclusive. Tonight's account is drawn from an abandoned registry, found in a county archive whose walls smell of dust and iron. The ink is nearly gone now, but the story it holds refuses to die. This is the tale of the house that spoke at midnight. Autumn 1903, Dunlow, West Virginia. The train came hissing through the valley just after dawn, leaving a trail of white steam that hung low between the ridges. The air was wet, heavy with coal soot, and the smell of the mine drifted on the wind, sharp and metallic. Like a wound that would not close, the Carter family arrived with little more than a trunk, a Bible, and a letter promising employment that no one could seem to verify. Thomas Carter was a man of steady manner, clean-shaven with hands that knew tools better than people. He'd been hired, or so he believed, by the county surveyor's office to assist with mapping the hillside properties for a new mining venture. Eleanor Carter followed him off the train, clutching a worn shawl around her shoulders. She had been sick the past winter, and the cold air of the mountains made her lips pale as candle wax. Behind them came their two children, Samuel, age 11, quiet but curious, and Nora, 7, who dragged her doll by one arm and looked at everything as though it might bite. A wagon waited at the edge of the road, driven by an old man with eyes like the bottom of a coffee cup, dark, unreadable, and tired. His name was Reed, though no one ever asked for his first. He tipped his hat to Thomas and said, "You'll be wanting the Marin place, I reckon. Ain't far. Just past where the woods start whispering." Thomas smiled politely, not catching the warning in the man's tone. "That's the one. We're renting through Mr. Winthrop's office in town." The old driver nodded once, then said nothing more for the rest of the journey. The house on Tug Fork Road. The house stood alone on a rise of land, half swallowed by forest. Its paint had long since peeled away, leaving bare wood gray as bone. Two chimneys leaned slightly outward, as though the house itself was exhaling after a long confession. The windows were tall and narrow, with panes that caught the light and refused to let it go. Inside, the air was cool and smelled faintly of carbolic acid, the kind used in hospitals and surgeries. Wide staircase climbed up the center of the house, and every step gave a low groan under their weight. Eleanor set a jar of wildflowers on the kitchen windowsill, trying to bring warmth into the space. Nora hummed to her doll, the tune broken and off-key. Samuel explored the back rooms, counting doorframes and nails, noting where the wallpaper had bubbled up like blisters. Thomas found an old ledger left on a desk in the study. Most of the pages were blank, but one bore a faint inscription in pencil: "Keep the windows shut after dusk. The house remembers the voice of the wind." He frowned, closed the book, and told himself it was nonsense. A whisper in the walls, that first night. The wind rose from the valley like something alive. The house creaked as if shifting in its sleep. Thomas lay awake, hearing the timbers strain and sigh, until he caught a sound that was not wood at all, a low, murmuring rhythm, like words spoken through water. He sat up. The sound faded. When he pressed his ear to the wall, it returned clearer now. A single phrase whispered again and again: "The debt is not forgiven." He told himself it was wind in the chimney, or mice in the plaster. Still, he woke Eleanor and asked if she heard it too. She shook her head, half asleep, and whispered, "Thomas, please, don't start." But he didn't sleep after that. Outside, the lantern on the porch flickered, though there was no breeze. Dunlow, a town forgotten by light. Dunlow was no more than a cluster of homes, a church without a pastor, and a general store that sold more gossip than goods. The people were quiet, their faces pale from years underground. They spoke of the old Dr. William Marin who'd built the Carter house in 1861 when the Civil War had just begun. He'd been a surgeon, it was said, treating soldiers from both sides when the fighting drifted into the hills. Then, one winter, the screams began. The townsfolk heard them echoing from the doctor's cellar, voices that did not sound entirely human. When spring came, The doctor was gone. The house stood empty for 40 years. Asterisk. No one knew what had become of Marin or his patients. Some said they'd gone mad from infection. Others swore the doctor had been trying to mend the mind to reach it through the body, and that the experiment had gone wrong. The townsfolk called the place Whisper House. When Eleanor asked the shopkeeper about the property, the woman only said, "If you hear it speak, don't answer. That's how it knows your name." Letters home. By November, Thomas began writing letters that were never sent. He wrote by lantern light, his handwriting growing smaller each night. As though afraid of being overheard, letter fragment, found. 1905. The land surveys are wrong. The property lines have shifted. The compass spins when near the well. I hear the same voice in the boards, in the chimney, even in my sleep. It says the debt is not forgiven. If I am not home by Christmas, burn the house. Don't let them keep it. Eleanor found one of his letters tucked beneath the mattress and demanded to know what debt he meant. Thomas only said, "Not mine." The first sign it was the night before Thanksgiving, when the first true disturbance occurred. Snow had begun to fall heavy. Wet flakes that melted on the roof and hissed down the gutters. Eleanor sat by the fire, mending Samuel's coat. When she heard footsteps crossing the floor above, she thought it was Thomas checking the windows. Then she saw Thomas walk in from outside, brushing snow from his shoulders. The footsteps continued upstairs. Samuel froze in his chair. Nora began to cry, saying, "It's the doctor." Thomas took his lantern and climbed the stairs slowly. The house fell quiet, every board holding its breath. He reached the landing, and the footsteps stopped. There was only one door left closed, the old surgery room. Once locked but now open just a crack. He pushed it wider. The lantern light reached only far enough to show a small brass listening horn fixed to the wall, an antique device once used to hear the heartbeat. A faint breath came through it. "The debt is not forgiven." Thomas slammed the door and nailed it shut. That night, they all slept in the parlor together, the fire burning until dawn. Testimony of Reverend Cole, 1904. Months later, after the Carters were gone, a traveling reverend named Elias Cole claimed he had visited the family once that winter. His written testimony survives. The man was pale. His hands blistered as though from hammering nails into stone. The wife was kind, but her eyes trembled when she looked toward the ceiling. The children would not go upstairs, nor would they speak while the clock struck 12. When I asked what troubled them, the man said only, "It talks when the sun goes down." I advised prayer. He replied, "Prayer doesn't help what's already heard." The forgotten room in early December. Samuel found something behind the cellar stairs, a hidden door made of cedar boards, painted over long ago. When Thomas pried it open, a smell like ether and rot escaped. Inside was a small chamber lined with shelves of empty jars. Each jar held a scrap of parchment, blackened with age. The handwriting was Marin's. Patients unfit for discharge. Subjects whisper to one another after death. The experiment succeeds. The body learns to remember. Sound. Eleanor demanded they leave at once, but the snow had trapped the valley. The roads were impassable. Thomas said they would stay until spring. He burned the papers in the stove, though the smoke carried a strange scent, sweet, almost like flowers. That night, the whispers grew louder. Nora woke screaming that someone had taken her doll's face. When Eleanor looked, she found the doll's mouth sewn shut with black thread. A note found in the chimney weeks later, while clearing soot from the hearth. Thomas found a folded scrap of paper tucked behind the bricks. It was written in hurried script, Do not let them hear you breathing. The house keeps count. When it reaches 12, one must answer. That night, they counted at exactly 12 chimes. The house groaned. A soft knock echoed through the floorboards 12 times. Then silenced. Eleanor began to pray aloud. But her voice faltered halfway through the Lord's Prayer, as if something else was speaking beneath her words. Winter deepens by Christmas. They were nearly out of coal. Thomas traded his watch for a sack of black powder and a loaf of bread. He walked home through a snowstorm, so thick he could barely see the road. When he reached the porch, the door was open. Inside, the house was warm, too warm. The fire roared, though no one had fed it. Eleanor and the children sat on the floor, eyes fixed on the wall where the brass listening horn gleamed in the firelight. From its hollow mouth came the faint sound of breathing, not wind, not echo, breathing, slow, labored, human. Thomas shouted, but his voice seemed swallowed by the house. He ripped the horn from the wall and threw it into the fire. The flames turned blue. The breathing stopped for a moment. They thought it was over. Then the floor beneath them trembled, not from wind or thunder, but from footsteps inside the earth. The house waits that night. No one slept. The snow piled against the windows, sealing them in. Eleanor sat by the fire, holding Nora close. Samuel stared at the floor, whispering to himself. Thomas wrote one last note in his ledger. The voice no longer needs the walls. It speaks through us. The debt is not forgiven. He closed the book and placed it on the mantel, outside. The wind carried a low moan across the valley. When morning came, a thin trail of smoke rose from the chimney, the last anyone ever saw of it. When the Carters first moved into the Marin house, the walls merely creaked. Now they whispered, and what began as faint murmurings at midnight soon turned into something deliberate, a call, measured and rhythmic, like breath drawn through hollow lungs. The winter of 1903 was long, merciless, and unrecorded. Dunlow disappeared under snow. No one came from town anymore. The road that wound toward Tug Fork froze solid, and for months, the Carters were alone with their voices, a slow awakening each night. The house came alive precisely at the stroke of 12. First, the shutters rattled, though there was no wind. Then the chimney exhaled, as if sighing out a long-kept secret. And finally the walls began to speak. The sound was soft, uncertain, almost questioning. It came from the rafters, from beneath the floors, and sometimes from inside the very walls where their shadows fell. Eleanor, open the door. Thomas, the doctor is waiting. The debt is not forgiven. Samuel tried to record the sounds in a notebook, writing phonetically the words he heard. When his father found it, the ink had frozen into jagged cracks, but some words could still be read. It sounds like us. Nora grew pale and thin. She refused to eat unless her mother sang hymns while she did. The only one that seemed to calm her was nearer. My God, to thee. Even then, she hummed off key, eyes fixed on the ceiling. Eleanor tried to stay strong, but the sound of voices burrowing through the floor at night made her whisper prayers through clenched teeth. Thomas drank from a small flask he kept hidden under the sink. Though he'd been sober for years, the lantern and the mirror one night in January. A light appeared upstairs, faint, like the glow of a lantern behind the curtains. Thomas thought it was Samuel playing. But when he opened the boy's door, both children were asleep. He turned toward the hallway and saw the glow coming from under the old surgery door, the one he'd nailed shut. He approached slowly, each step pressing a groan from the floor. The closer he came, the stronger the light grew, pale, flickering, like fire reflected on glass. He put his ear to the door. From within came a man's voice. Calm, instructive. Steady your hand. Keep them still. Listen to the pulse. Thomas backed away, chest tight. He grabbed the poker from the hall stand and struck the door 3 times. The voice stopped. When he returned to bed, Eleanor was awake, clutching the sheets. What did it say this time? She whispered. Thomas only shook his head. Nothing human. By morning, the nails were gone again. The door stood open just enough to show a mirror, inside tarnished, circular, and cracked straight down the center. The glass reflected not the room, but a moving shadow. Pacing slowly back and forth. Journal of Eleanor Carter, fragment recovered. 1904, January 17th. The house does not sleep. Thomas speaks less each day. He watches the fireplace for hours, as if waiting for something to crawl out. Samuel has taken to counting the knocks at night. There are always 12. Nora says the doctor stands at her window. She says his mouth does not move when he speaks. A visitor in the snow late one morning. A knock came at the door. A traveler gaunt, with a limp, claimed he'd lost his horse along the ridge. He asked for warmth, a cup of water, maybe a bit of bread. Eleanor, desperate for company, invited him in. The man's name was Henry Goss, a prospector from Kentucky. His beard was thick with frost, his eyes red from the cold. He sat by the fire, warming his hands, and noticed the cracks in the walls. He asked if the house was old. Thomas said, older than the town. Henry smiled faintly. Then you must have heard it too. Everyone stopped moving. He went on slowly. I used to bunk down near here in the war. They said this house was where the wounded went, but none that entered ever came out walking. Thomas asked if he knew of Dr. Marin. Henry nodded. Knew of him. Surgeon, they said. Worked on bodies that were still breathin'. Thought he could make 'em better. Maybe even talk to the ones that weren't. The Carters exchanged glances. Henry stayed the night, sleeping near the fire. At midnight, he woke screaming, clawing at his chest, shouting that something was whispering inside him. When Thomas shook him, he gasped one last time, it's counting. In the morning, Henry was gone. Only his boots remained, neatly by the door, filled with snow. The ledger of debts by late winter. The snow thawed enough for Thomas to dig near the well. He'd noticed that the ground there never froze, not even in December. "6 feet down, he struck something solid, a wooden box sealed with pitch. Inside were medical instruments wrapped in cloth, a rusted stethoscope, and a ledger marked, Accounts, W. Marin, M.D. The entries began normal enough, lists of patients, dates, supplies. Then the handwriting changed, slanted, frantic. April 1862. They won't rest. The voices are clear now. They ask for balance. I have paid what I could, but the debt remains. May 1862. The experiment failed. The house remembers. I cannot leave. The last entry read, each night at 12, one voice joins the choir. When the 12th speaks, the house will answer. Thomas closed the ledger and whispered, there were 12 soldiers here. Eleanor corrected him softly, 13. You forget the doctor himself. That night, the whispers multiplied. The choir, it began with murmurs, then grew into a low harmony that vibrated through the beams of the house, each voice distinct, each speaking in rhythm, a dreadful living pulse. The words were fragments of, pain, he cut too deep. I beg to die. Forgive us. Forgive him. Eleanor covered the children's ears, but the sound came through the air itself, through breath. The mirror upstairs flickered again, showing not reflection but depth, as if the glass were a window into a narrow, candle-lit hall lined with faces. Thomas took the hammer and smashed it. The moment it shattered, the voices stopped, replaced by the slow, even heartbeat of the house itself. Then silence, a silence so complete that even the snow outside seemed afraid to fall. The sheriff's visit weeks later. Sheriff Colby came on horseback, delivering a message from the town. He said people had seen strange lights on the hill, blue flickers that rose from the chimney. He found the Carters thin, sleepless, their faces gray. Eleanor begged him to make them leave, to arrest them if he must. Thomas only stood by the window, watching the woods. The sheriff stepped inside, tipping his hat. "Cold one today," he said, trying to sound casual. No one answered. Then he heard a faint murmur, like someone praying behind the walls. He called out, thinking perhaps another family member was upstairs. No reply. He touched the staircase banister. It was warm, pulsing faintly, as if alive. Colby left that afternoon, refusing to return. In his report, he wrote, "The structure is unsound. The residents show signs of exhaustion. I believe the house may be occupied by more than them." The 13th voice. As March bled into April, Eleanor fell ill. Her skin turned cold and damp. She spoke less, slept more. Thomas sat beside her bed each night, whispering prayers he barely remembered. Then, one evening, she woke suddenly and said, "He's almost finished counting." Thomas held her hand, tears in his eyes. "Who?" he asked. She looked toward the ceiling, where the faint hum of voices grew. "The doctor." She died before dawn. When Thomas came down to the kitchen, he found Samuel and Nora sitting by the fire, holding hands. Samuel whispered, "She's talking." Upstairs, through the floorboards, came Eleanor's voice, calm, steady, whispering the same words as the others. "The debt is not forgiven." After the death, Thomas buried her by the frozen creek, marking the grave with stones. He stopped speaking for days. At night, he sat in the parlor, watching the clock strike 12. Samuel's journal recorded what happened next. Father spoke to the walls. He said the doctor was wrong. He said we could still leave. The house answered. It said, "One voice remains." Father told me to take Nora and run when the clock chimes next. That night, the clock struck once. Twice, by the 12th chime. The entire house shook. What Samuel saw, Samuel later told a neighbor before vanishing himself, that the walls opened like lungs. He saw his father pulled toward the old surgery door, light spilling through the cracks. From within came shapes, dark and shifting outlines of men, their mouths wide but silent. Then came one more voice, deep, echoing, and close to his ear. 13. The sound shattered the lanterns. The air grew thick with soot and frost. Samuel grabbed his sister and fled into the snow. When he looked back, the house stood dark again. No fire, no light, no sound. Just the door, swinging gently in the wind. The snow melted at last, bearing the raw, muddy earth around the Marin house. The trees that had bowed under winter's weight straightened, though their branches still whispered when no wind stirred. No one saw Thomas Carter again after that last night. No one but his son. And even Samuel's account, scrawled in a trembling hand across torn ledger pages, reads like the half-memory of a fever. What remains are fragments, the testimony of townsfolk, a burned journal, and what was later unearthed in the cellar when the ground thawed. The boys' flight, Samuel and Nora, were found 3 days later by a trapper named Owen Sutter. They were wandering along Tug Fork, barefoot, clothes torn, faces gray from cold and ash. When he carried them to Dunlow, the boy spoke only one word: "Count." Nora did not speak at all. The townsfolk took them to the church basement, wrapped them in blankets, and gave them bread. By the second night, Samuel began muttering in his sleep half words, half sobs. He said the house had taken their father. He said the walls had opened. The doctor from Huntington came to examine the children. He noted no fever, but both had shallow breaths, like those who'd inhaled something toxic. When asked what had happened, Samuel whispered, "The doctor came back." The sheriff, remembering his visit, rode out with 2 men to the Marin house. They found the door open. Snow melted in a perfect circle around the porch. Inside silence, soot, and the faint smell of burnt oil. No bodies. No footprints. Only a book left on the mantel. Its cover scorched but intact. The Journal of W. Marin, M.D. The journal, recovered 1904, October 1861. The war has brought more bodies than any surgeon can tend. The wounded lie in the hall, the cellar, even the parlor. The house is full of pain, and yet I hear none of their voices at night. It is too quiet. November 1861. My work begins anew. I have noted that the heart, though still, remembers rhythm. If I can reintroduce sound a tone of proper pitch, perhaps it will resume. The voice is power. The body listens. December 1861. The whisper comes not from without, but within the walls. My instruments hum when I leave them near the plaster. The house resonates at a frequency no ear can wholly perceive. It learns. January 1862. The first subject, Private Callum, did not survive the reanimation, but I heard his voice 12 hours after burial. It came through the walls like the sound of boiling water. I am certain now. Consciousness leaves traces, and the house retains them. March 1862. The others complain of voices, but these are not hauntings. These are echoes of memory, each brick, a record. Each nail, a nerve. The house itself is a vessel. I must teach it to listen. April 1862. It has begun speaking back. The postmaster's account weeks after the Carters vanished. The Dunlow postmaster, a man named Elmer Bryce, recalled something odd. Thomas had mailed 1 package the month before, a sealed tin addressed to the Bureau of Health, Washington, D.C. When Bryce opened the ledger to confirm, the entry was crossed out in red ink. No such package had ever arrived. Inside the abandoned Marin house, the sheriff later found a tin canister buried beneath the parlor floor. It contained a small glass vial and a note written in Thomas's hand. Not illness. Not haunting. The house hears what we will not confess. Destroy the foundation. Salt the ground. The vial held a single thing, a human ear, dried and shriveled, with a thin brass wire protruding from its base. The sheriff's descent, Sheriff Colby, returned to town pale and trembling. He told the Reverend he'd heard voices in the cellar, voices that recognized him by name. 2 nights later, he hanged himself behind the jail. Pinned to his coat was a note. It said 12. I made 13. Spring, 1904, the dig when the thaw came. A group of men miners mostly decided to burn the house. They carried torches and whiskey and enough dynamite to level a hill. But as they neared the porch, the air grew heavy. The wind fell still. The eldest among them, a man named Ward, swore later that he heard singing faint beneath the ground. A choir. The others denied it, but each looked pale. Ward went first into the cellar. He found a wall of brick, newer than the rest, sealed tight. When he tapped it with his pickaxe, it rang hollow. Like a tomb. They set charges and lit the fuse. The explosion cracked the ground but did not level the house. The smoke cleared to reveal the wall blown open. Behind it lay a room. No one spoke for a long time. Inside were 12 cots, each with bones arranged neatly beneath sheets. And at the far end a 13th bed, empty except for a physician's coat and a stethoscope. Tarnished but intact. In the corner sat a wooden chair, facing the wall. On the wall were words burned into the wood grain itself. The house has learned to speak. Ward fled first, shouting that he felt something breathing behind him. The others followed, leaving their tools where they fell. When they reached the road, the Marin house was burning, though no one had lit it. The fire rose blue and silent, the letter that never sent among the ruins. They found one charred envelope addressed to Eleanor Carter Charleston. WV. The ink bled, but the message could still be read. If I cannot end what he began, then let it end with me. The debt is not his alone. The house only repeats what it's owed. If you hear it again, do not answer. The signature was Thomas Carter's, dated March 6, 1904. Nora's silence. Nora Carter never spoke again after that spring. She grew up in a state asylum outside Wheeling. The doctors described her as calm, obedient, and unresponsive except at midnight. Then she would sit up in her bed and whisper a single sentence. Always the same. 13 voices now. She died in 1922. The nurse who found her claimed she heard a sound in the wall faint, like a woman humming nearer, my God, to thee. The final confession. Dr. Marin's addendum inside the melted remains of the house, archivists later discovered. The final page of Marin's journal fused to a piece of glass. The ink had survived, preserved by heat. It began as mercy, to give voice to the dying, to let them confess before their breath failed. But the house remembered what I did not. Each confession stayed. Each sin found echo. I gave it words, and it spoke them back. Now I cannot silence it. When the 12th voice joined, it began asking for mine. I built a house to heal, and instead I built an ear. The last line was written not in ink but in blood. The debt is not forgiven. The house today. Locals say the land remains cursed. No trees grow on the foundation. At night, when fog drifts from the river, travelers hear faint murmurs beneath their feet, like 100 voices whispering through soil. A few years ago, surveyors marking the site for a new road found metallic echoes under the ground. They dug for hours, following the resonance. At 6 feet deep, the sound grew louder. The foreman ordered them to stop. He said it didn't sound like wind or water. He said it sounded like breathing. Some debts, it seems, are not paid in coin or blood, but in the memory of those who refuse to forget.